Welcome to the Encore Audio Archives YouTube channel. I'm Taper Dave, and this is my channel. I've uploaded hundreds of talks here that I've recorded at meetings in West LA, and I've also recorded conventions starting in 2013. I've got a bunch of those up. And Walt and Mary Murray, the original owners of Encore Audio Archives, started the company in the 80s, and Walt recorded Joe and Charlie's and a bunch of stuff down in Vista, California. My sobriety date is June 20th of 1994. I hope you find something you like, so please like and subscribe to my channel and comment down below. If you want to hear something that I don't have or that you don't see, I'll see that I get it. Anyways, take care and have a great day if you want to.
My name is Jack Kissell, and I'm an alcoholic. I'm pleased to be here. It's a lot of very important feelings and memories and things are connected in my sobriety to the desert, and it's always a real pleasure to come out here. I hope I get to share a little bit of that kind of thing later. I was sitting at this table here a few months ago attending a meeting, and Bob M. from Palace V was talking. And the first thing he does is kind of take a private survey and describes very briefly the general trend of most alcoholics drinking, to drink 5 or 10 years rather successfully and with a certain amount of pleasure and sociability, and then gradually work into some kind of problems in their drinking, and eventually then to become an alcoholic by crossing that invisible line, and then finally finding themselves with the compulsive need to drink and lots of problems, and eventually getting into Alcoholics Anonymous. And then he asks everybody that has had that general experience to raise their hands. Now I was sitting here very interested because I was sure there must be a few here who had had that kind of experience with their drinking. It had nothing to do with me. That isn't my pattern at all. And I looked around, and 80% of the room raised their hands and identified with that pattern of drinking, and I was really surprised and impressed. And Bob says that in general that is the percentage. That isn't how it was for me, and so naturally I was eager to see about the rest of us, you know, those of us who started on a different tack early and stayed there, as I did. I felt a little like I had this unreasonable fear. Chuck mentioned that he wanted to pay attention to the people in the little room in back there who were the non-smokers, and immediately it crossed my mind that it won't be too long before we smokers will be the ones in the little room in the back, and they will have taken it over, you know. I mean, I've been a part of the minority by choice all my life. That's just how it is. I now recognize, after having only a tiny little bit of clarity begin to come in as I stay sober one day at a time, and I realize, for example, that the first 16 years of my sobriety could really be characterized as a dry drunk. I mean, that's basically what I was feeling and experiencing. I didn't know it then, but that's pretty much how it was. On the outside, looking at my life, it was all right. I did pretty well. I did well in school. I was active in athletics and, you know, had apparently a lot of friends. It's just that I didn't feel that way. I never felt that way. I felt lonely, separate, different, angry, and afraid, and it didn't matter what I did. It didn't matter what you did. It didn't matter if you approved of me, or I did well in school, or I was in the school play, or I managed to get on the teams. I felt out of it. I always did. And I think that some of the symptoms of my disease were there and operating long before I even found booze. One of the symptoms I understand and have seen happen in me is deviousness. And by the time I was 14, I felt so out of place, and I was looking for some way to change my life and to fix it, and I found a rather devious method to do that. Basically what I think I wanted to do was get out of the environment I was in, to in effect at 14 run away from home. But I didn't want anybody to know I was doing it. Well, if you're Irish Catholic in South Bend, Indiana, there is one way you can do that, and I chose that. I went away and studied to be a priest. Everybody approved of that, everybody. And I was the oldest of 5 kids. My mother and father were very pleased, and I think kind of secretly felt that they therefore had a ticket to heaven, you know, because I was going out there. And I got out there, and I loved the idea, and I was very spiritual minded in those days, and I loved it all. And I got out there, and about 6 months after I had been there, I realized that I felt lonely, separate, different, angry, and afraid. That nothing had changed. That I had gone to all that trouble, and I hadn't fixed anything inside me at all. I knew I didn't belong there. And I started doing something that I continued to do for many long years after that for various other reasons. I looked around at what they wanted, and I tried my best to give it to them, even though I knew it had nothing to do with me. It was an act. At the end of 2 years, I was made model seminarian of the United States, and I knew it was a lie. It was just an act I had put on for them so that I could get along. Basically, so they'd leave me alone. I did what they wanted, and then just leave me alone. And it's a curious and interesting thing. Not too long ago, my mother, who is visiting us and with me tonight, and I'm sure I'm going to shock her a little bit, but that's just the way it is, mentioned to me that one of the priests I had known in the seminary was in AA. And I got all excited about that, and I called him. And as it happens, just a curious, interesting thing, I don't know if it has anything to do with anything. He's the guy that selected me for model seminarian back there when he was practicing and I was getting ready. What a difference it was when I talked to him for those few minutes on the phone, you know. When I said I'm in AA, and I told him how long I've been in, which is 6 years, 5 months, and a couple of weeks. And he told me, well, I'm really glad, and I'm really trying, and I haven't got as long as you do, and I could encourage him, you know. And it was a great feeling for me. When I got out of the seminary, I felt like a failure. I was 16 years old, and I was a total failure. I had failed God as I understood him at the time. I felt like I'd failed my mother and father. After all, I'd canceled their ticket. You know, and they were going to have to make it on their own then. And I felt like I had failed myself. And I fell out of place. I always fell out of place, but I fell out of place again. And I had to make it in this, you know, I was going to be a senior in high school, and I had spent 2.5 years, 20 hours of silence a day, not looking at girls, you know, and I had to find a new way to live. And these 4 guys took me out to introduce me to a new way to live. And we bought some beer, not a lot. I know we didn't buy a case. And there were 5 of us, so, I mean, there wasn't a lot available. And on that first night, if there was an invisible line, I crossed it somewhere early in the evening, and I never recrossed it. It just happened that way for me. That first night of serious drinking, a series of symptoms developed in me. One of them is bad judgment. I've always had that. And on that particular night, you know, I mean, if you're 5'5" and 120 pounds, belligerence is bad judgment. And I got very belligerent, and particularly with this one guy. And it turned out that he was an all-state halfback, and he just beat me up, is what he did. 3 times, because I didn't get the message the first 2 times. And I had a terrible time, and there was a little blackout going on in the midst of that, about an hour and a half that I couldn't recall later, and these 3 guys, then I had some kind of an alcoholic rage, and at that time it then took 3 guys to subdue me and get me in the back seat of the car, and they got their feet on me and on the floor and drove me home, and I experienced a personality change. I became kind of warm and wonderful on the way home, and cried a little bit, and I got sick on his floor. And they dragged me out of the car, and they pulled me up to the steps of my front door, and they leaned me against the front door of our house like a thing, and pushed the doorbell and ran because they didn't want to deal with my father. my dad opened the door, and he was 45 years old and a practicing alcoholic at the time. And there was his oldest son, ex-seminarian by one day, 16, and drunk. And he did the only thing he knew how to do. He punched me out, too. I loved it, man. I loved it. I loved the whole thing. I didn't stop drinking for the next 24 years to the best of my ability, one day at a time. I just kept drinking all the time, every time I could handle it. I mean, handle to get it. Tried to get it, that's all. I mean, if it was there, I drank it. When I first got here, I heard you talk on occasion about controlled drinking. And I understood what that was. I didn't ask anybody. I understood. It's what I always did. I went out there and tried to drink just as much as I could find and then try and control myself. That's what I thought you meant by controlled drinking. I never wanted to be an alcoholic. I never trained for it. And I started early, and I just stayed there all the time. I got into trouble early, very early. My mother was out here a couple of years ago, 3 or 4 years ago, and she heard me talk for the first time, and afterwards she kind of corrected me. She said, well, you know, that accident didn't have anything to do with drinking. And it was only until I got honest on this program that I knew it did. When I was 17 years old, I was taken to a coroner's inquest for manslaughter, and I had had booze that day while driving. I had been drinking. Nobody knew it, apparently, or were not saying it. They gave me one more chance. They gave me one more chance for 24 years. If I'd have had one more chance, I don't think I'd have made it here. They almost one more chance me to death. I kept talking myself out of it. Had a lot of trouble in my life. When I was 17, I had that thing. I also desperately tried not to be an alcoholic. Now, the way I did that was really simple. I had a definition for alcoholism. And as long as I didn't fit it, I was home free. An alcoholic is somebody who doesn't get an education, you know. I don't know what that has to do with anything, but it was my definition. It kept me from looking at me. And as long as I didn't have to look at that problem, then I didn't have to deal with it. So I got an education. I was very fortunate. We couldn't afford it. I got a full scholarship, and I went out there with all the highest of ambitions, the highest of aspirations. Soon after that, I think it was in the second year, I was arrested for inciting a riot. And that wasn't because I intended to. I mean, it wasn't a political action at all. It was just I said the wrong thing to the wrong people at the wrong time, and I had incited a riot. And when this little thing got started, I walked away because I didn't want any trouble. I went to a quieter place to drink. And when I was sitting in history class in the summer at Notre Dame, 2 detectives interrupted the class and pulled me out and wanted to talk to me about that riot downtown. And so I was in and out of trouble all the time. At that time, the prefect of discipline at the school, who had the power and authority to kick me out, and I thought that's what he was going to do, sat me down, and he gave me a little lecture, and then he gave me one more chance. I was 19, he gave me a little lecture. I didn't hear it. If I had, maybe I'd have changed some things. What, in effect, he said to me is, you're an alcoholic. That's what he said. Of course, I didn't hear it. And the way he put it to me was this. He said, Jack, there seem to be 3 kinds of drinkers. There's the amorous drunk, a hostile drunk, and a happy drunk. You seem to be a very bad mixture of all 3, and you shouldn't drink at all. And I just turned him out. And I listened to hear if he was going to give me one more chance. And he did. And so I left his office and went directly down to Joyer's to celebrate the fact that they were going to give me one more chance. I was drunk before he had seen the next guy, you know. I drank. That's just how I live. I did my best in every other respect, and I did my best to stay out of trouble. I never did, but I did my best, and I drank. I had a lot of difficulties in that school and finally managed to graduate. And because some of the symptoms had developed, deviousness, as I say, I realized that I had some problems. I mean, that time, for example, the guy was driving 85 miles down the highway and I threatened to throw myself out the passenger side. I mean, it wasn't an attempt, it was a gesture. I know that because I tried to throw myself slowly so that he could save me. I mean, I didn't want to get hurt. But by then, I realized there must be something wrong with me. And so I decided to get psychiatric help. But I didn't want anybody to know I was getting it, including the psychiatrist. And, well, I managed to do that. I think an alcoholic can do most anything he sets his mind to. What I did was get myself drafted, and as an English major with no medical background of any kind, I got myself assigned to the medics, and then through a series of classification and assignment interviews, got myself assigned as a psychiatric social worker, where I could be trained by the government in psychology so that I could find out what the hell was the matter with me. I went through the course successfully by my standards. There were 77 of us got into that thing. Only 7 graduated. I was one of those, so I didn't have to go to Korea. That was one side of the success, and the other side was I managed to go through that entire course, hear a great deal about schizophrenia and all kinds of neuroses, and never hear a word about alcoholism. Now, I know for sure they taught it, but by then other symptoms of my disease had developed. Channel vision and tunnel hearing. I could tune you out anytime I wanted to. I could disappear before your very eyes. Stand right there and be gone. Didn't hear you at all. I had to learn not to do that in sobriety, and it's not always easy. And so there I was. I got through that course, and I got assigned up at Fort Ord, California, where I drank on a daily basis to oblivion every night. I drank to oblivion. I was very active, very busy. By then I had added a few other chemicals to my recipe, and one of them was uppers, so I was a pretty busy drunk. So I'd go in my office at 8 o'clock, and I'd work there counseling these neurotics until 4. And then I would slip off base where I was living illegally, and I was acting in a show in a theater group up there, and I'd be in that play. I'd get out of the play at 11 o'clock, and I'd be drunk by midnight, and I'd be asleep by 4 or 5 o'clock in the morning, and I'd get up next morning and do it again. And I just kept doing that and doing that and doing that. And finally I got discharged, and I realized that California hadn't healed me. And so I left and went to New York in the hopes that it would heal me. And I started looking for solutions. I spent a lot of time from then on. Just about that time I began to, well, of course I had been in the Army looking for my solution, just as long as it didn't interfere with my drinking. And one of the solutions I decided I needed was I needed to find a good woman, and I found one. And she had a little 3-year-old by a previous marriage, and I thought that was a good deal because it was an instant family, and hopefully it would give me stability, because that was my problem. I was slightly unstable, erratic, and that was all it was. I just needed to settle down, you know, and so I found this good woman with a ready-made family, and that was going to settle me down. And it didn't do that, because I neglected to look at anything to do with my drinking. And we were married, and soon after that, and she began to look at my problem too, and she looked at it with the eyes of an already sick Al-Anon, so she couldn't see it either. And so she decided that my instability was the result of my not having a child of my own. And because she was a pretty sick lady, and her judgment wasn't all that good, she decided to heal me by having another child. And she was very determined. She had 6 miscarriages and then my son. And see, when she had all those miscarriages and all that difficulty in labor, it made me very nervous, and when I get nervous, I drink. So the more she tried, the worse I got. And finally we had that son, and I was just really tired of all this. And drinking more heavily, you understand. So she looked at our situation soon after and realized that the problem was I needed a daughter. And so she set off again. And after a couple more miscarriages, she had a daughter. And it just made me sicker. And then finally she gave up the idea of fixing me with children. We did have one more, but she swears that one was for fun and for free. And then it went on and on and on. I searched for ways to solve my problem. One night in Greenwichville, or one after, it was a morning in Greenwich Village is when it was. One Sunday morning, My wife and I were headed for breakfast. She was pregnant as usual. And a friend of mine, a playwright, stopped me and just gave me hell there on the street. And I was trying to get to breakfast. I knew that my wife was hungry and I was thirsty, you know. It was Sunday morning and I'd have Bloody Marys. Nobody'd even look at me funny because people did that. And it was all right. So I was nervous to get away from this guy, but he really bawled me out. He said, "You're 30 years old and you're not responsible. You got to get responsible." And just to get him off my back, I promised him I'd find a regular straight up and down bread and butter job. And that was in May. And in September, I was working as head of the department of a high school. Never did that before. And I did it for 3 years in New Rochelle High School. I was pretty happy there. I liked the job, I liked the kids, I liked everything about it. I also, in an effort to keep my wife off my back, started going to therapy once a week. A very eminent psychiatrist there, very bright man. I was with him for 3 years, and I wasn't able to help him much at all. And he didn't affect me a bit. I considered the therapy hour a success if I got a laugh out of him. That was my criteria. So that didn't work too well, and by then other symptoms of my disease had developed: defiance and rebellion and grandiosity. I really wanted to keep that job as an example of those symptoms. I really did want to keep that job. I liked it and I was enjoying it, and the kids liked me and everything was going pretty well, but they had a rule, and I can't keep your rules. I mean, any rules. Don't give me a rule because I can't keep it. And one of their rules was that you had to have a master's degree to get tenure. And at that time, I had already done some graduate work at Columbia and some graduate work at Fordham. All I actually needed to get a master's degree was to go one night a week for 1 semester, and I wouldn't do it. My attitude was this: first of all, I knew everything there was to know about my field, so what were they going to teach me? It was a waste of my time. And the other one was, if they wanted me so bad, change the rules. That was simple. At the end of 3 years, the Board of Education decided not to change the rule, and I was amazed. And they let me go. I was really surprised. And then I started bouncing around from job to job looking for my answer in jobs, and that never worked. An ex-movie star and I got together and formed a repertory company in Westchester, New York. We raised $85,000 in the first year and never did a play. There is another name for that, and fortunately, the Board of Education that I had personally selected, handpicked each one of the 5 of them, got together and fired me and closed down the theater and gave the money back. Or I might have found you under different circumstances. And then I started bouncing for jobs. And then I realized, at that point, I realized what my problem was. It was what had 7 years earlier been my solution. It was that damn good woman I had. You know, if I could just get rid of her, maybe I could settle down and behave myself. Well, she's with me tonight, and she's not very big, and I'm afraid of her. That's how it is. And so I really didn't want to tell her directly that I was leaving her and those 4 children. So I didn't. I just got a job in Ohio, and I told her that I would be bringing the family out as soon as I scouted the grounds. And I went out to Ohio, and I was never going to see them again. And later on, when we finally got to you and she got to Al-Anon, I discovered she had made the same decision, didn't tell me either. We had left each other forever without announcing it. I got out there and I was 33 years old and I had this job and I enjoyed it. And for the first time in my life, I felt like I could drink without somebody looking over my shoulder. When I was at home, my parents, and then the Army, and then my wife, and then my wife and the kids, and then my wife and the kids and the Board of Education, and on and on and on. And finally, I was out there where nobody was looking over my shoulder. And in 6 weeks, I was dying. I just had no control at all. I'd left that therapist in New York, just left him to get well on his own, and went out there and started drinking like I was going to die every day. And I finally realized that I was in a lot of trouble, and the job hadn't even started. And I called my wife. And by then she had developed an almost terminal case of Al-Anonism. And so I called her and I said the magic words. I said, "I need you." She packed up the 4 kids and the dog and sold the furniture and came out to Ohio to take care of me. And I tell this story. It's not the most dramatic thing that happened to me, but I try to remember it because I don't want to forget what booze did to me so many times. The simple fact of the matter is I was delighted that my family was coming. Really delighted. In my drunken, sentimental, irresponsible, maudlin Irish fashion, I loved those kids. And they were all going to rejoin me. And I found this gorgeous house that we were able to rent, and I put flowers in every room. And I got all dressed up, and I set out to go down to the train station to meet him. And I stopped at the Milano Club for lunch, and met a couple of guys there and had a little drink before lunch. And then I saw a guy I hadn't seen for a long time, and I bought him one, and then he bought me. And then I think it was my turn. And you know, before long, the conversation became so engrossing, I forgot to meet my family. And when she got off of that train, the youngest was a babe in arms. My son had had an impacted wisdom tooth removed earlier, and he was hemorrhaging, and the dog was sick. And I wasn't there to meet her. Just like I had not been at the births of those 3 kids, I always meant to be. My intentions were marvelous. I always intended to be there. I'm the same guy that put the flowers in the room. I just forgot to show up after I started to drink. I had that situation that an alcoholic knows so well. I had to drink. I was never apologetic about it. I never hid it from you. I had to drink. That's how it was. The only problem is that when I drank, I couldn't predict what I was going to do next. And it kept me on a roller coaster that kept me terrified, that kept me drinking, and which kept me on a roller coaster. And that's the way it was. I never did apologize. My wife later on would ask some of those dumb Al-Anon questions that they will ask. I mean, I would park my car on the lawn, stumble through the bushes, crawl up the stairs, be able to find my keys, but not the front door. And she would finally open the door and look down at me and say, "Have you been drinking?" I always wanted to be able to look up and say no, you know, but she wouldn't have believed me anyway. I never did that. I mean, she'd say, "Have you been drinking?" And I'd say, "Since 1946. I mean, what else is new? I mean, "Have you been breathing?" "Yeah, I've been drinking." "Fish swim?" "I drink." I mean, let's talk about something that's new. Sure, I drank. And I didn't apologize for it. There was no need to. It's just the way it was with me. And I tried desperately to look good to you. Desperately I tried. I got another job after I lost that job I just had. I was there 2 years, and they fired me. They fired me for alcoholism, and nobody ever mentioned booze. They fired me for my attitude. They fired me for my arrogance, for my irresponsibility, for my immaturity. They liked my talent, they liked my drive, they liked my ambition. They just didn't like me. And they got rid of me. They decided they would rather have a little less success and a little more peace and quiet. And I didn't care. I was getting tired of them anyway. And I found a job that I thought was going to solve all my problems. It had everything I required. It had all the dignity that I required. With only a bachelor's degree, I was made head of the department at the university, and I was a college professor with all that dignity. But you see, I had also just gotten progressively sicker and crazier, and all those other chemicals that I had added had warped me and changed me, and as my friend Matt says, booze had begun to wash all the good out of me. So I was a little confused. And for example, the confusion in this situation was, I really wanted to be a success with this department, and I worked very hard at doing it. But I had also become a revolutionary, and I got 26 of the kids on campus together, and we were planning to blow up the administration building. There's a certain amount of conflict there, if you notice it, you know. And I lived inside that conflict. I lived inside that conflict all the time. I ran as desperately as I could, as fast as I could, doing one thing after another, trying to prove to me that I was okay, and I never knew I was. At no point in my life did I ever feel like I was ever part of anything. And my life just kept getting worse. And about that time and along that period, because I had also, as another defense, I realize now, as another defense against my alcoholism, I had become an intellectual. An intellectual I now define as somebody who has been educated beyond his capacity. And there I was, flinging around concepts that I couldn't find any sense for, couldn't understand, but they protected me. Language that I didn't know. But the spiritual problem had developed over many years, and I can summarize it now. It was telescoped for me, but in those days, I mean, it just seemed to be a natural outgrowth of everything that was happening. But what really happened is I became so desperate and so disappointed and so sick and angry in me that I couldn't believe there was a God who was kind. I ran into that thing, Job's dilemma, you know, unjust suffering, and most of it was going on inside of me. But because I was so miserable inside me, I began to look outside for other unjust suffering, malformed babies and disease and war and prejudice and what have you, and recognized finally in my judgment that God was either cruel and all-powerful or kind and impotent, and in either case I didn't want anything to do with him. And once I'd made that decision, it was easy for me to come finally to the conclusion that there was no such thing, that this was a designless, purposeless universe full of accidents, and I just happened to be one of them. And that's where I was for many years. That's a hopeless place to be. I know, I've been there. It's a hopeless place to be. And it went on and on and on. I lost that job after 2 years because of my radical activities, and we came out to Ohio from Ohio to California to make things better. And of course they got worse. And the next 3 years were packed with bizarre activities and insanity and craziness and DTs and hallucinations on a regular basis, and a lot of acid, mescaline, psilocybin, cocaine, uppers, downers, and booze and booze and booze. And it got worse and it got worse. And one day, in 1971, my 4 children, the oldest was 20 now. She had been out of the house 2 years, just as soon as she was legally able. Came back, and the other 3. And they got in that little house of mine in Hollywood, the living room, and they said, "Dad, we do not love you. We don't want you and we don't need you. Get out of our lives. We're sick of it. We just don't want you around anymore, and leave Mother alone. You're killing her." And I begged and pleaded, and they didn't listen. They'd heard it all. And they packed a suitcase and kicked me out of my house. And I stood outside there feeling full of self-pity and self-dramatization, and feeling lonely, separate, different, angry, and afraid one more time. And I had an experience a lot of us had. It took me a long time to know what had happened. But what happened that moment out there when I decided whether to go left or right is I had a little moment of clarity. I suddenly could see where I had been and where I was going. I had hated my poor father all my life and blamed him and blamed him and blamed him, and remembered from the sound my kids were making. My kids were crying and comforting their mother. I remembered being 9 years old and my brothers and my sister and I crying. And I remembered it as clear as if I were there that day. And I remembered vowing, I will never do to my children what my dad is doing to us. Never. And there I was, all those years later, and I had done much worse to my kids than my dad ever did to us. My dad stayed in one place. I dragged him all over the country looking for my answer. He never had hoods as friends. I was proud of the hit men I knew. I was an ugly man, and I dragged my children through all that ugliness, and I stood there knowing that I had done that and despising me. And I did the only thing I ever knew how to do under those circumstances. I went and got a drink. What else? What else was I going to do? And I drank all that day, and I drank all the next day, and I closed a bar the next day, and I was driving someplace with some little girl about the age of my oldest daughter, and I got arrested one more time. By then I had been arrested quite a few times. I had totaled 12 cars, and I never saw that as a pattern. I could explain it one at a time, because I couldn't look at the pattern. I dare not look at the pattern. And I got arrested again that night. That one was a bum rap, you know. It really was. What happened is my extreme caution drew the attention of the heat to me. I sat through 3 green lights waiting for the right one, and they thought that was a little strange, and they pulled me over and took one look at me, and they knew what the problem was. And they asked me the usual questions, and a lot of you here are familiar with the questions. Have you had anything to drink? Yes. How many? 2. And we followed that logic along. They said, well, in that case, you won't mind taking the breathalyzer test, and I was believing my own lies. So I said, no, of course not. In those days, legal drinking was .010. I measured 2.7, thank you. And I was driving. They were impressed that I was conscious, let alone driving. I managed to offend those 2 arresting officers rather quickly, and they were free to express their opinion. And so by the time I got to the jail, I wasn't in too good shape. And then I broke my own record. I managed to offend the jailer in a flat 30 seconds. He asked me, what's your name? I said, what's yours? He was very polite. He told me. And then I made fun of it. And he didn't think that was funny. And then I demanded a phone call out of my arrogance. You know, I said, I get a phone call, right? And he said, sure, you can have a phone call. It was 2:30 a.m. in Los Angeles, so I called New York City to talk to my lawyer. He didn't think that was funny. And so he put me in a receiving cell. Those of you who have not had that particular experience, a receiving cell is just bars. I mean, there's no bench or facilities or anything. It's just bars. And I kept saying to him, I got to go to the bathroom, and he kept me there for an hour and a half. I kept saying, I got to go to the bathroom, and he kept saying, go ahead. Don't tell me alcoholics are will-less. Man, I stood there, I'd die before I let him win that one. And now I have to tell you that at that time I did not look precisely the way I looked this evening. Among other things, I looked about 10 years older then than I do now. And there were some other things. My hair hung down to my shoulders, and I had a long Fu Manchu mustache. I was 40 trying to look 17, and I wore brocade bells and a flounce shirt and a shoulder bag. And I had offended everybody in that jail. And as it happened that night, it was a little jail, and there were only 3 drunks in the drunk tank that night. One was a very elderly man, really quite elderly. And, I mean, I don't want to take his inventory, but he wasn't interested in women, you know. And the other one was a real young kid, and he was passed out on a bench. And when my wife came down to bail me out, they couldn't figure out which of the 3 of us belonged to that nice lady, you know. And they had a little discussion over it, and the jailer finally said, I think your husband's probably in a different jail. And she said, no, he's here, that's his purse. And they did not bail me out to her. And they sent her home. Then they gave me a kick out at 5:30 so they wouldn't have to feed me breakfast at 6. And I called my wife with my usual charm and humility. I said to her, where the hell were you? And she said, I was there. I'll come right down and get you. And I said, don't bother, I'll walk. And I hung up on her. I don't know why I called her. I guess just to make her feel bad. And I stumbled and staggered home. Stopped on the way to get well. And she met me at the door, and she had allowed me back in the house again, but This time when she met me at the door, she made a little statement. I'd heard it before. There was only one small difference. This time she meant it. And I have been an alcoholic by then a long, long time, and I can tell the difference. I know when you mean it and when you don't. And this time she meant it. She said, Jack, I can't take it any longer. It's 17 years. I won't watch you kill yourself one more day. Don't be here when I get back. I'm going to work, and when I get home, be gone. And I'll have the paper served today, and if you're not, I'll have you ejected. And she left, and I tried to comply with her instructions. But see, I hadn't made any money for over a year, and the only money I had she gave me. That's been going on in sobriety lately, and I don't understand it, but it's all right. But there I was, and I tried to comply with her instructions, and I made some phone calls in the hopes that somebody would loan me $1 or put me up for a while or something. I made 37 phone calls that morning by actual count, and a new discovery. See, I didn't have any more friends either. I had just drank my way through it all. There was no place to go, nobody to talk to. And I felt desperate. And I did all the only thing I ever knew to do when I feel desperate. I got a bottle of white wine from underneath the sink and I drank it. Now, there is one small little event that I hardly noticed then. When I was in that jail, it was ugly. Some ugliness happened, and I felt ugly. And I had nowhere to turn. I was in that lonely place. And I did then, that evening, something that I think was the result of a lot of events that followed. I did something that I try to do twice a day as a partial fulfillment of the 11th step of Alcoholics Anonymous today. I didn't know it then. But I sat there and stared through two of the bars at a little tile that was in front of me, and I tried to empty my mind. I tried to experience internal silence. I was, in effect, emptying myself of self for an instant there, and I think something changed. That's the only way I can explain any of the succeeding events. Because when my wife was at work that morning, for the first time in 17 years, it occurred to her, nobody told her, it just occurred to her. She flipped through the telephone book and found alcoholism and looked it up. And she made a phone call, and she described our relationship, and whoever listened to her listened well. And said, I don't think you're married to a crazy man or even to just an ugly, rotten man. I think you're married to a man with a disease, a physiological, pharmacological, diagnosable disease for which there is help. And she gave her a phone number and sent her home. And when she got there, I was just lying there on the bed, not doing anything, except maybe turning a little more yellow, because that was my color, eyeballs included. And she woke me up, and I looked up, and she was crying. Now, I've seen her cry many, many times, in pain and fear and rage and frustration. I didn't even recognize the nature of the tears until months later. But what it was is, as she looked at me before she woke me up, I'm sure she saw for the first time, here lay a man dying of a disease he never chose to have. A disease. And when she woke me up, there was compassion, tears of compassion. And she asked me if I would accept help. I remember precisely, drunk as I was, she said, Jack, you're sick. You want some help? Well, I knew I was sick. I mean, if you'd been through the 3 days that I had just been through, you'd be sick too. And so I said, sure, I'd take help. Any help. I had no idea what she was talking about. I was kind of thinking in terms of an ambulance or something, you know. And she went to the other end of the house to make a phone call, and I had a little glass of white wine sitting by my bedside for when I wake up. And I didn't drink it. Nobody told me not to, I just didn't do it. And I didn't smoke any of the grass that I usually did when I woke up, or grab any of the pills from under the shelf paper in the top drawer. I just followed her to the phone, and by then she had made the connection, and she handed it to me, and she said, here, he wants to talk to you. Well, now that was an improvement right there. I mean, I just spent the whole morning and people didn't want to talk to me. So I grabbed the phone. And the guy said one simple sentence that a lot of people in this room have had the opportunity many times to say, and he said it that morning to me. He said, "Hi, my name is Bud. I'm an alcoholic. Can I help you?" And I knew he could. I just knew right away that he could. I began to cry right then. And I hadn't cried, to the best of my knowledge, for about 10 years, except professionally. And there I was, feeling different because of this one dumb, simple little statement he had made to me. "I'm an alcoholic. Can I help you?" And I had never been able to follow your rules. Never, any rules. Don't make suggestions to me. I can't follow them. This guy said, "Why don't you come up and talk to me?" And I said, "Fine. Where do you live?" And he said, "Oxnard." I said, "Where's that?" He said, "Well, it's about an hour and a half from you." And I said, "Good, we'll drive there." And he said, "Why don't you pack a little suitcase?" And I said, "Why?" And he said, "Well, you might want to stay here." And I said, "Okay, I will." I was following directions, man. I was willing. We went on up there and talked to him. We sat down in his office, and he told us what happened to him. He told us what it used to be like, what happened, and what it was like then for him. He was a year and a half sober at the time. And for the first time in my life, I came across somebody that understood. Somebody that knew what it was like. Somebody that knew all those little things that I never ran into anybody that understood. He knew about those little bugs on the periphery of your vision that when you turn quickly are gone. He knew about that. He knew about drinking and the need to drink. I heard his story and I understood he knew how it was to drink the way I drank and to feel the way I felt. I knew, without his even telling me, he must have known about those ungrounded, unfounded fears that I had lived with so long, and in the last year just become so terrifying to me. I would wake up in the middle of the night and know for a certain fact there was somebody in the house, an intruder out to hurt my children, and I would slip out of bed terrified and get to the kitchen and get a knife and search the house thoroughly and cautiously so as not to wake anybody up, and then finally discover to my satisfaction that there was nobody in the house that didn't belong there. And then start back to bed, and maybe the refrigerator would turn on, or a limb of a tree would brush up against the house and I would have to search it again. And lots of times I searched the house all night long. I searched the house all night long and then slip into bed at dawn so my wife wouldn't know what she was living with. You know, I had the opportunity of sharing that little experience when my wife and I spoke at a public information thing for Al-Anon office and AA Central office. It was a group of teachers, and we talked about Al-Anon and alcohol, and I shared this little thing, and one bright young teacher after the thing in a question thing said to me, "Did it ever occur to you that intruder you were afraid was going to hurt your children was you?" And I said, "Oh yeah, I love all that Gestalt stuff. I really do. I am fascinated with those things. I like them, and I like crossword puzzles. I really do. I love it when you can define the problem with all kinds of imagery and metaphors. But see, it doesn't interest me a whole lot because I got the answer. And if I live in the answer, I don't care how you define the problem. Define it for all you want, any way you choose. You see, the simple thing is, it went away when I began to work the answer. It's not here anymore. Call it whatever you want. I found the solution. And I found it there that day with that man. I haven't had anything since that day. I haven't had anything that changes my mind in any fashion since that day. And that is a miracle. The other night I happened to be at a meeting where this little gal took a 9-month chip, and she said that she was an older lady, and she said it was a minor miracle that she was there with 9 months, She's almost as much as if she'd had a baby, and everybody giggled. And I thought, no, It is as much a miracle to me that I am sober consecutively longer than 3 days as if I had a baby. I mean, I don't know which would be the bigger miracle. I could not and did not believe in God. And I had a spiritual awakening. I got a 30-day chip. 30 consecutive days without pills, grass, booze, cocaine, any of it. 30 consecutive days, clean and sober. And it dawned on me there was a power. There had to be. And I had heard, people trying to kind of sugarcoat the idea that there was some kind of, this is a spiritual program, by telling me, well, for the time being, just use the power of the group. Well, I knew they didn't work. That group power, I had started groups and they couldn't keep me sober. I had a lot of groups. Something else had kept me sober 30 consecutive days. Something I couldn't define, and it was not in me to do. That's when I had some kind of an ability to realize there must be something. There must be something. And since then, that moment of being willing, I have come to experience changes inside me which make me know there's something. I've changed. We got out here a little earlier, my wife and I and my mother, and we drove around. We had a pretty peaceful time, and I got a little irritable as it got closer to the meeting, and my wife said, well, how come you're nervous? I mean, there's no reason to be nervous. And it's an interesting thing. I get a little nervous before I speak at a meeting. It used to be, if I was going to be in front of a group, I would be nervous for fear you would find out. I would be nervous for fear you would see through my act. Now, I'm just a little nervous for fear that I'm not going to show you the full thing. I get a little nervous that I might be tempted, because of the size of the group or whatever, I might be tempted to put on an act. And I know I'm as sick as I am secret. I know that I gotta show you me, or I will die. And I don't want to die now, man. I feel like living. Some beautiful things have happened inside me. Not all the outsides have been so terrific always, but that's okay. I looked at that guy who understood what it was like to drink like me, and I looked at him very carefully, and I said to him, now, I want to ask you one simple question here. You are telling me that I can stay sober one day at a time the rest of my life. Do you actually mean that I can stay sober and be comfortable? And I looked directly at him when he said it, when he answered that, to make sure he wasn't lying to me. And I could see he was comfortable. And I believed him. He said, if you work the steps of Alcoholics Anonymous and practice the principles of this program, you can stay sober and be comfortable no matter what the external circumstances of your life may be. And I have come to know that is true from my own experience. So a lot of good things have happened to me. I want to just share with you two things. One of them happened here in the desert. And the other happened in Hollywood. When my son was 12 years old, he stood inside the front door of my house for 2 hours in the dark with a ball bat, waiting for me to come home so he could welcome me. Fortunately, I got arrested that night. When he was 17 years old, he had been in Alateen. And he was asked to share his experience as an Alateen at the Palm Springs Roundup. And on a Thursday night, the lady, the good woman who had kicked me out of her life forever 5 years before that, sat next to me and held my hand. And my 17-year-old boy, who was as old as I had been when I was at that coroner's inquest, got up and told his experience as an Alateen. And in the course of that talk, he shared with those roughly 2,500 people that were there that he loved and respected his father, and you gave me that. and the other one happened in Hollywood. Through a series of coincidences, if you're new, you just wouldn't believe, at the end of a year and a half coming from a totally financial morass, my wife and I were able to buy a little house and put those 3 kids in it. And when I was 2 years sober, they gave me a birthday party to celebrate my birthday in Alcoholics Anonymous. And I was a little irritable before that one, too, because I was pretty sure that nobody would show up. And as it happened that day, 250 members of Alcoholics Anonymous came to celebrate my birthday. The same guy 2 years before that who couldn't find one person to loan him $1 in Los Angeles. And they came because they loved me, not because of me, because of anything other than the fact that they love me unconditionally. They don't care what I do, think, or say. They love me anyway. And during that little party, I happened to see a new guy there, and I recognized what was happening. He felt lonely, separate, different, angry, and afraid. And you know how our parties are. Everybody's talking and nobody's listening, and it gets pretty noisy. And I grabbed him and I pulled him outside, and I made him listen. What I told him is this, and if you knew, I tell it to you. I said, listen to that house sing. Listen to that house sing. That is the promise of Alcoholics Anonymous. Thank you.
I'd like to congratulate the birthday people again. I'd like to thank Paul for Chapter 5 and Bill for the traditions, and I'd like to give Jack another hand. And after a moment's meditation, I'd like to ask Al to lead us in the Lord's Prayer.
I think we got a great talk going on here. Thanks for watching the channel. Taper Dave here. Just curious, do you think this is better than Zoom? Okay, this is how I prepare my drone for launching. I like to do it inside the cab of my truck so I'm not standing outside in the weather. To install the joysticks for control, up and down, right and left, powered on. I have an Android phone that I use to connect it to the drone with, and it's actually controlled through the iPhone, through an app. Oops, wrong way. It's actually controlled through the iPhone, or through this Android phone, through the app. It's actually controlled through the Android phone, through an app, and you connect it through this short connection right here.
Remote control connected.
Remote control's connected. So I pull out the drone. I have to extend the legs, long legs extended first, then the short legs. Remove the gimbal protector. Set that aside, then power it on one short burst, then one long burst. I lay it down. So I have to go to calibrate. So the drone's not connected yet. It shows you here as this drone gets disconnected, even though the remote's powered on. So the drone has to establish it's connected. So I go into the app to calibration mode. First I'll calibrate the remote controller. Start calibration. Out, in, oop, out, in, up, down, and then this little wheel is to control the gimbal. So it's calibrated. Go to gimbal calibration, start calibration, and then it calibrates the gimbal. I don't know if that shows up. The gimbal's moving all over the place. Changes, you can see it on the video. And I'm calibrated to take off. It's acquired 7 satellites at the moment. There are 26 satellites up in the sky, which it has to acquire before you can take off. So it's connected. It's got enough satellites. This is white. I can go to press this little arrow button, swipe right to take off, and it would start the motors if I slid this to the right. But I'll wait till I get outside. Don't want to do it inside.